Not surprisingly, new studies show Canadians are anxious as ever because of COVID-19. For many, that feeling might not go away as the economy begins to reopen and we sort of return to normal. Joining me now to share some tips on how to manage anxiety, Dr. Jonathan Douglas from Central Ontario Psychology. Doctor, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
My pleasure.
When you last were here, you talked about this being a grieving process right now we were going through. What stage are we in now as we look at reopening the economy and returning sort of to normal?
Well, I think what we're doing right now is sort of trying to re-engage with the world under circumstances that really have not changed. The reality is that the disease is still out there. The risks are still out there. The chances of running into somebody who has, the virus, if anything, has gotten larger, not smaller. So, as we re-engage, what we have to recognize is that what we've achieved is flattening that curve. And that's a tremendous achievement that Canada's been able to do, but that doesn't eliminate the virus. That just makes it a more manageable crisis. So we're re-entering the world in a state of crisis.
Let's bring up that picture from the video and images from Trinity Bellwoods Park. And can you explain that a little bit and the impact those images are going to have on some people who are extremely worried about going back into a normal point?
Well, there's a couple of things that I notice about this. First of all, the camera angle doesn't really demonstrate that people might actually be staying reasonably distant. Like if we had like an overhead shot, maybe we'd see that there really is these groups of people are actually doing a fair job of staying apart. So, and I think that's part of what happens with our anxiety is that it starts to drive the way we perceive things and maybe causes us to suspend some of our critical judgment. If you notice how much grass there is there, that grass represents something as well. That being said, are these people taking appropriate precautions? Are they, doing only what's absolutely necessary? There's very, little evidence that anyone is following the recommendations to wear masks. So, both of these things are true. As we re-engage the world, I think what's going to happen is that our anxieties can start to drive, for some people, that urge to control other people's behavior. And this is going to, I think, be a source of conflict, and it's going to be a bit of a challenge. What I'd like to suggest that people do is pay attention to the recommendations and follow those as carefully as we can. And that's what's going to allow us to re-engage the world as safely as we can. And ultimately that's going to be, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I was going there's two sides on this. I think there are people who are rebelling against everything that's gone on and let loose. How do they process what they've done? The ones who weren't, there were clearly people there who weren't socially distancing and physical distancing and practicing proper safe practices, excuse me. But and from the other side, the people who are extremely concerned about that, how do those people process that and find a way to return back into society or get back into normal a little bit?
Yeah, it's a great question, and if I had the answer to that, I could probably solve the polarization of the politics that we see in the world today. Because I think you're exactly right. It is a way of how do you approach the world, how do you interpret the world. Take a look, for example, at the numbers. Right, we get bombarded with these numbers, and the numbers we're bombarded with are typically they are cumulative. Well, cumulative numbers don't change, right? We've had 6,600 deaths, and that number is not going to go down. It's only ever going to go up and become in that way more anxiety-provoking. A far more important question is, what's the direction of that number? What's the vector? Where are we headed? What is it? Is it rising? Is it dropping? And that number alone doesn't give us a very great deal of information. And what we have to recognize is that both of these numbers are very, very important, right? The cumulative number is nowhere near as important as, where things are headed and what can we do to stop from getting worse. Whereas the people who focus on the cumulative, the people who focus on the cumulative.
Sorry, go ahead.
Just the people who focus on the cumulative have an argument that says only a tiny portion of the population has this thing, right? And so they're not wrong either. But the issue is, how do we keep ourselves safe going forward into the future?
So what you're saying is people really need to take a level-headed look at things
Exactly.
if you're coming at it from either side.
Exactly. Keep both perspectives in mind. Constantly question your own assumptions. Test your thoughts against what we know, and listen to the experts. I think that's a really critical way to try to help manage the anxiety. Is let's do what we can and recognize that, yes, we're going to feel some anxiety, right? And we may feel some frustration that other people don't, because people do have these different ways of approaching it.
And for people, as we start to open up a little bit, there's people who have been affected by this. They've been laid off. What
Yes.
can they do? How do they approach this? That's the stress level is even higher for them.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm pleased to say that the Ontario Psychological Association has set up its disaster response network, which connects psychologists who are willing to offer 6 sessions of free psychotherapy, and that's accessible through the Red Cross or through through dialing 211 across Ontario. In addition, we're reaching out to associations for health professionals. The family physicians, the nurse practitioners can access that through their associations as well.
All right, Doctor, I'd love to keep talking about this. There's so many more things we could ask about it, but we've run out of time. We appreciate you joining us this morning, though.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jonathan Douglas from Central Ontario Psychology. We'll have more on Breakfast Television coming up after the break.